morning, if you'd like to, you can take your Bibles out, turn to Mark chapter 5. Actually, Mark chapter 4. We'll look at a story just before Mark chapter 5 here in just a second. Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. I want to say a word of thanks to all of you for letting me be with you this weekend. It's really been a joy. It's always a joy. You all know that whenever you get to go and be in other places with your family that you've never known before and never met. And so this has been great for me. I didn't know very many folks coming out here that I know of, and it's really been, y'all been very kind to me, and I appreciate that so much. I appreciate this weekend with all the young people who are here, and appreciate churches like you all who want to invest in young people, encouraging them to do what's right and to love the Lord and not to wait around on that, but to do it now. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate all you who are younger who are doing that. That's encouraging, and this was a lot of fun and really energizing for me, and I know it'll be great for me when I go back home. So thank you very much, and God bless you in your work for the Lord and your work with each other, and loving the lost in your community. This weekend we've been talking about being all in, being really, really, really committed to doing what the Lord wants us to do and being totally bought into what He's about and not what we're about or what the world's about. Think about things in your life, though, where you've been all in on. You've given yourself to it completely. How often is it that whenever you go all in on something, things kind of get crazy and a little messy? You know, because the more you have to buy into something, the more important it is. And the more important it is, a lot of times, it's complicated. I think about this. I just became a father a few months ago in January. And that's an all-in kind of thing, you know? Whenever you're a parent, those of you who are parents know. It also gets kind of messy in very tangible ways sometimes, right? You know what I mean? Your jobs are that way. If you care about your job, you're committed to it, everybody's working hard, they're caring about some kind of project that you're doing, and that can get messy sometimes. Different personalities, different opinions get involved, some wrench gets thrown into it that you weren't expecting, things get messy. In our communities, in school, in what you fill in the blank, whatever it is that you're doing, things get messy the more important they become. And how much truer is that for us whenever we're all in for the Lord and committed to the Lord? Things aren't always very clean. Because, as we just sang and reminded each other a minute ago, the way we come to the Lord is broken. And so here we are, some broken people trying to do what's right, trying to be what the Lord wants us to be, but that doesn't happen overnight. I'd like to still look at a story here in Mark chapter 5 as we look at what Jesus does when Jesus meets a mess. Because the truth is, that's what we all are. Whether we all want to acknowledge it or not, that's what we are, at least from time to time, if not more often than not. At the end of Mark chapter 4, Jesus just got done doing a lot of teaching, and He gets into the boat with His disciples in verse 35. And it says, on that day when evening came, He said to them, let's go over to the other side. So leaving the crowd, they took Him along with them in the boat, just as He was, and other boats were with Him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus Himself was in the stern, asleep, on a cushion. And they woke Him, and they said to Him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? He got up and He rebuked the wind, saying, hush, be still. And the wind died down and it became perfectly calm. And Jesus said to them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? They became very much afraid and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey Him? Can you get in that boat for just a second and try to imagine what that would be like? We often make the observation that these guys were experienced, some of them at least, were experienced men when it came to sailing and being in boats and storms and whatnot. But I'm not, and I don't know, maybe you guys are. But imagine being in a boat. And maybe some of you experienced this, where you've been in a boat and a storm came up and it got crazy and it was scary and you didn't know what was going to happen. And here these men are, and they have seen Jesus do incredible things, heal people and help people and do things they had never seen before. And here, while they're bailing out the water, and can you imagine that, right? All of the boats filling up, so you're bailing out, and, James and John are arguing with each other about whose fault it is this happened. Thomas is saying, we're all going to die, because that's just what he did. And they're just all getting all scared and stuff. And there they are bailing the water out. And then somebody just happens to look in the back of the boat, and there's Jesus. Just sleeping, like it's no big deal. And you can understand why they ask their question. It's interesting to me, the question they ask. What they don't ask is, Master, aren't you going to do something? You notice that? Now, we might think that's the question they should have asked, but then I guess their meteorologists were as bad as ours are, and I'm guessing they had never met anybody who could actually do anything about the weather. And even though Jesus had done some phenomenal things, he'd never done anything like this in their experience. And so their question was not, Master, would you do anything? All they wanted to know was, Lord, teacher, don't you even care? Can't you feel bad for us? Are you really going to sleep through our deaths? And I guess they never would have expected that Jesus would do much more than just care about this mess that they were in. But he gets up and he does something they had never seen before. He stops the wind. I like Luke highlights it. Mark alludes to it, but in Luke's account in Luke 8, Luke says specifically that it was the wind and the waves stopped, showing that Jesus didn't just get lucky and say, be still, and the winds just happened to stop. Like, ooh, no, that's not how it worked. He actually stopped both the wind and the waves by his power because he's the one who made them in the first place. And so, of course, they would obey his voice. But I want to key in on the question that Jesus asked them, because I think it's a question we need to ask ourselves. Whenever we look in the mirror, we realize, I'm a mess. Like, I'm trying to come to the Lord, and I fully acknowledge that I come broken just as I am. And I don't know if I can get unbroken. I don't know if the Lord can do much with me. Do you notice the question Jesus asked them? He says, do you still have no faith? I got to say, if I was one of the disciples in the boat, that'd be a hard question. That'd be a hurtful question. No faith? I dropped my net and I followed you. No faith? I brought you over and got all my tax collector friends together to listen to you preach. No faith? No faith. For whatever reason, Jesus said the way they were is they didn't believe that he could do something about their mess. And the truth is, a lot of times we have storms in our lives. Sometimes the storms are around us. More often than not, the storms are right in here. And we struggle with whether the Lord can do something or if he even cares that we're perishing. And so what we need to understand is that we should have a deeper faith in the Lord when he meets us, when he meets a mess. And the story in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20, I think is really a lesson for the disciples to learn about what Jesus does when he meets a mess. So let's jump into that story in Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. I'd like to read with you the first 5 verses, Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. It says, they came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. And when he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him, and he had his dwelling among the tombs. And no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. And constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gashing himself with stones. All right, so after the most harrowing experience of your life, you pull up on the other side of the sea, and this is the man that you're about to meet. It seems pretty apparent that probably they didn't know all this stuff immediately, but they probably learned it later on as the story progresses. But Mark here at the beginning of the story tells us about this man, this really big mess that they were about to meet. Notice some of the details about this man. And now I want you to stop being one of the disciples in the boat, but be this man and imagine living this man's life. We see right off the bat that he's a demon-possessed man. I don't want to get into a lot of details about the biblical teaching about demonic possession and so forth. Suffice to say, it was for a very narrow window that we see a lot of people being controlled by demonic force, and this is one of those. Most of them were in the life of Jesus. And here, this man that Jesus would meet was controlled by a demon. Now, I realize that today, I don't believe we see demonic possession the same way. And yet, you all know, Far too often we are haunted by our demons. We use that language, right? Our guilt, our failures, the way people in our family or our community treat us. And we have these things that haunt us and influence us and harm us. And in many ways, what this man shows us is a picture of what we look like because of sin in the world. Look at some of the details about this man the text says. One is he's living in tombs. As far as I know, the only kinds of people that live in tombs are dead folks. And that's where this man was. He was a dead man walking. Which reminds you, by the way, of our condition apart from the Lord. Like Ephesians chapter 2 says, that once we were dead in our trespasses and sins in which we once walked. Just like this man, a dead man walking. You keep on going in the text. It says that no one was able to bind him, and then it's almost like, oh, I need to explain. People had bound him with shackles and with chains. Now, I want you to think for just a second about how this happened. And the text doesn't say, so I don't want to state this as fact, but I want you to try to imagine, why did people have to chain him up? Did he hurt some people at some point? Did he scare some people? Because of this demon's influence, were people so frightened by him and alarmed by his very existence that they had to just push him away, just throw him in a dungeon somewhere, chain him up, lock him up, shackle him down? You know, a lot of times because of the lives that we live, have you ever experienced that? Where because of some kind of evil in your life, some kind of disposition that you've got, some sort of sinful attitude or sinful behavior, it shackles you down. Matter of fact, the Bible uses that kind of language. In Romans chapter 6, it talks about how we become slaves to sin. We get mastered by it. And not only does it chain us down, but it ruins our relationships. You can imagine that with this man. You don't have to imagine. It's obvious because now he's not living in the city anymore. I don't know if he ran away or they drove him out or what happened, but he had no more relationships because of these demons in his life. Has that ever been you? Is that you? That because of the evil that you've brought into your life, stuff happens with people that you want to love. People can't trust you. People are afraid of you. People can't love you because of the evil that's inside. This man was a mess. Now, he seemed great. He could break shackles and chains and all that. But what good was all that strength? What good was all this power that he has? Because it left him outside alone in the tombs. And did you notice what he was doing? It said constantly, night and day. And I take that to be, if it wasn't 24 hours, it was about 22 and a half. I mean, this was all the time, night and day. He's screaming in the tombs. You ever been to a concert or a game or something like that? You go to a football game, and you're screaming and hollering the whole time, and you get home, and you're like, man, I'm tired. I didn't even play, but I'm exhausted. Imagine what this man must have felt like. All the time, every day, wearing himself out. And as if that wasn't enough, one of the saddest things, and I think it's sad just because I know people who've done similar things to themselves, where it says that he was gashing himself with stones. I have no idea why this man was doing it. Maybe it was the demons that were just harming the man. But I know why my friends who struggle with this do it. They're trying to get the demons out. They think that if they hurt themselves, that maybe somehow that will bring some kind of relief down to their soul. This is an incredibly, incredibly sad picture. Oh, one more thing that I'll say that isn't included at this part of the text, although it's implied later, and Luke specifically says it, is that this man was naked, which biblically nakedness is used as a symbol of shame, of separation from God, of sin. It's not a good thing, right? And so here this man is, naked, isolated, with the dead, cutting himself up, exhausting himself night and day all the time. Does that sound ever familiar in your life? Do you know people like that? What's Jesus going to do about that? Just time out for a real quick second. Get back in the boat. You're one of the disciples, and you pull up on the shore, and here comes this guy. Look at what verse 6 says. It says, seeing Jesus from a distance, the man ran up. Okay, pause right there for a second. Now imagine you're the disciples, and you just had the scariest night of your life, plus Jesus smacked you around on your faith, and so you pull up on the boat, and you're pulling it up onto the shore and all that, and you turn around, and here comes down the hill a naked, screaming, cut-up man coming full speed at you. What are you going to do? I'm pretty sure that's where somebody would say, I think Jesus meant the other side of the lake, not this side of the lake, right? You'd run. Any sane person would run from a mess like this. Do you know what Jesus does not do when he meets a mess? Jesus never runs. Jesus never runs when he meets a mess. Doesn't matter how big your mess is, doesn't matter how deep your pain is, and how much your demons have haunted you in your life, and how much they've ruined you, and how much sin has wrecked your life, even by your own choosing, if that's how it's worked. Jesus never runs, no matter how big the mess. Let's keep going in the story. Continue in verse 6. It says, the man ran up and bowed down before Jesus. You'll note, actually, when you read through the entire Gospel of Mark, everybody bows down before Jesus because they know he's somebody different than anybody else in the world. Continue, it says he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, the man said, what business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me. For Jesus had been saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And Jesus was asking him, what is your name? And he said to him, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Let's pause there for a second. This is a fascinating part of the story to me, and you can consider this, and you can correct me if you think that I'm misreading what the text is saying here. Do you notice there's something very strange about this conversation? First off, the man is begging Jesus, please don't torment me. Remember, put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that later. But he's imploring or begging Jesus, please don't torment me. And the reason that he was begging Jesus that was because Jesus was saying to the man, come out of the man, come out of him, you unclean spirit. But you notice that it's hard to tell who Jesus is talking to in the text. Look with me at the pronouns that we have here in these verses. In verse 7, we've got him, the man, saying, what business do we have with each other, Jesus? I implore you by God, do not torment me, right? For he, that is Jesus, had been saying to him, that is the man, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he, that is Jesus, was asking him, the man, what is your name? Then listen to what the man says. This is where it gets weird. The man, and he, the man, said to him, Jesus, my name is Legion, for I am many. Is that what yours says? It says, my name is Legion, for we are many. And the man was begging Jesus not to send them, that is the demon, the collection of demons that were in this man, out of the country. Here's the point I want to highlight to you. Sometimes whenever we get messed up by sin, it begins to take ownership of who we are. It begins to take ownership of who we are. You see that in this man? Now Jesus is parsing out, hey, your demons are not who you are, right? The man felt like they were. My name is Legion, for we are many. And Jesus says, no, that's not how it works. Like, you are not your demons. Although we can feel that way. We can feel like this is just who I am. You ever said that? You ever heard somebody say that? You got some problem, you got some sin, you got something you need to be working on, and the defense mechanism we have for ourselves is, well, this is just who I am. The Lord doesn't see it that way. And what's amazing to me is this man is such a mess that he's allowed these demons to take over his entire persona. But do you realize what Jesus does? This is fascinating to me. And I think if I were one of the disciples on the beach in this conversation, I would be really disturbed with how the conversation goes. Because Jesus is big. He wants to start a conversation with the man. Do you see that? Jesus' big question of the guy is, what's your name? What's your name? Now, I realize it could be that Jesus wanted the man to say Legion so the disciples would be impressed, but I think they were going to be impressed anyways. I don't think that's what's going on at all. You know what I think we see here in this part of the story? Is the compassion of Jesus. We see how much he cared about him. I want to know what your name is. You know, this is pretty rare. When Jesus met the leper, he didn't ask his name. When Jesus met a bunch of people, he didn't ask their name. But here is this total mess, this yelling and screaming, naked, gashed up tomb dweller, and Jesus wants to know, what's your name? I want you to think about people who you don't ask their name on a day-to-day basis. You know, when you go through drive-through, pull in at whatever place is you like to get some lunch, is that your first question? Like, hi, what's your order? You say, first off, what's your name? You're not going to do that because I just want my tacos or my burger or my chicken sandwich. That's all I'm here for. You know, I'm not here for a friendship. The Lord is. He cared about this man. And he didn't just see this man for all of his demons and all of his problems. He saw this man for who he was. And so he asked, what is your name? Here's a second principle. Our first principle we learn about Jesus is that he never runs, no matter how big the mess is. The second principle we learn about the Lord is that his compassion is greater than our complications. His compassion is greater than our complications. It's easy for us to think, man, I don't think the Lord can do much of me. Like, I've done too many bad things. I've made too many mistakes. I've been too selfish, too evil. I've cheated too many times. I've lied too many times. I've been sexually immoral for too long. I've been greedy. You fill in the blank. Whatever it is, no matter how complicated you are, no matter how much your demons have twisted you up and you don't even know who you are anymore, the Lord still has deep compassion, no matter how big your complications. Amen. And I think that this is something, by the way, you may not buy what I'm selling on what Jesus is doing when he asks the man, what is your name? But I'll suggest to you there are some other ways Jesus is going to show his compassion. In a minute, we're going to see this guy's got some clothes on. Where do you reckon those clothes came from? You think he got the demon cast down? It was like, oh, back in my tomb house, I've got a drawer. I'll go grab some clothes. I know this is embarrassing, you know. That's not how, I don't think so. The only thing I can figure is where he got those clothes was from somebody who had some compassion on him. And seeing as how Jesus and the disciples were the only people with him, that's where it must have come from. Besides that, Jesus is going to help this man find healing from his past. Jesus, we'll see in a minute, Jesus is going to make a decision for this man that may not be what the man wanted, but it would help him to get past his past. Because Jesus' compassion is greater than our complications. Let's keep on going in the story and see what else we learn from the Lord of when Jesus meets a mess. If you keep on reading in verse 11, it says, now here we got the man. He's begging Jesus, please don't cast these demons out. Please, you're tormenting me. You're hurting me. And in verse 11, it says, now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain, and the demons now implored him, saying, send us into the swine so that we may enter them. No idea why the demons wanted that. Doesn't really matter. There's great debates on that. You can read about it, but whatever. Let's keep going in the story here. Verse 13, Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them. And they were drowned in the sea. Now their herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed, sitting down, clothed, and in his right mind, the very man who had the legion. And they became frightened. And those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. All right, so we've been the disciples in the boat. We've been the man. Let's be these herdsmen for a second. Here you are just minding your business, doing your job, sitting there, watching pigs. Nice day, everything's cool. And then this boat pulls up, and this ragtag bunch of guys jump out of the boat. And then Mr. Legion, who the legends have been big about, runs down, bows down. You see this little weird conversation and screaming and hollering and all that kind of stuff. And then all the pigs start stirring. And pretty soon they're not just stirring, they're stampeding. And there they go. And you can't do anything to stop them. And you try to jump up and try to catch a few, but you got no shot. And there they go off the edge of the cliff. Right? And I want you to imagine just standing there, there they are, like drowned in the sea. And there was a lot of them. You notice there was thousands of pigs. Some have estimated, and it depends on your estimates, but even if these were cheapo pigs, this is $500,000. And some have estimated if they were nice, and if they operated by the laws of supply and demand back then, there weren't too many pigs floating around in the region of the Jews. These might have been some black market, high-value pigs, you know what I mean? So this could have been in the millions. Who knows? This is a lot of money. This is a huge chunk of the economy of this region. and it was your job to watch them. And so you better believe they ran back and they told everybody, hey, it was not us. It was this guy, right? And this was such a big deal. Everybody from all the town comes out to see what happens. And they find this man. He's sitting there. He's clothed in his right mind. There's Jesus. There's the disciples. They're hearing the story. They can see something crazy happen. I want you to notice what the people did next. We stopped short of this, but in verse 17 it says, and they began to beg Jesus, implore Jesus to leave their country. That's not what the Lord wanted. You ever notice that? When you read through the Gospels, you see Jesus always wanted access to people, right? He was always a little disappointed when he didn't have access, but he wanted people that he could teach and he could help them understand the good news that the kingdom was at hand. And here some people drive him away. What would we learn? What do we learn from the Lord here to see this happen? That he was willing to sink perhaps millions of dollars in the sea to mess up his reputation so that people wanted him out and gone. I think the lesson that I take from this is that no cost is too high for one person. No cost is too high for one person. The Lord was willing, he'd sink millions of pigs if he needed to for this one man. He'd be cast out of an entire area, a region, a whole country if he needed to, if he knew it would help one person. That's how much investment the Lord wants to make in every one of us. And I'll say this, it's the investment he has made in every one of us. Because really it wasn't the pigs that dove into a sea for all of us. It was Jesus who dove into our filth and into our sin and into our darkness in order to set us free from evil and from sin and from all the things that we've done in our lives. And when you question, man, I don't know if the Lord really has enough in his bank account to pay for all of my problems, to deal with all the stuff that I've got going on, you need to remember that the Lord paid everything for us. He gave his life. And I mean the life that he had before, to come and be with us, to be one of us, to be a partaker in flesh and blood, so that he would be merciful and compassionate and helpful and exactly what we needed. And then he lived a life of service, and he spent his time teaching and helping people and helping them know him. And then he died on a cross, a death of shame, a death of total rejection, a death of a criminal, naked, hung up like a piece of meat, because he wants to invest in you. He wants to change the lives of every single messy person who's ever lived on earth. That's how much he cares. And whenever we ever question, I don't know if the Lord has enough in me, look to the cross, because the Lord will invest whatever it takes for every person that's alive ever in the world. We got to remember that. Let's go back to our story here. And I'd like to, before we continue the story, I'd like to make a little interlude here to make some points about this story in general so far before we kind of close it out. We've noticed that no matter how big of a mess you are, the Lord never runs away. And that's because his compassion is greater than your complications. And you can know that he's willing to invest whatever it takes for every single person. But notice how he made his investment, how his compassion was enacted in this man's life. You notice Jesus didn't do any tricks, He didn't grab the man by the head and do some kind of seance. He didn't light a bunch of candles and lay the man in the middle of it and have all this. He didn't do any of that. He just spoke. Similar to what happened on the boat, right? Jesus just spoke, and the wind and the waves silenced. I'll actually suggest to you, this is part of why Jesus said they had no faith. Remember what Jesus said to the disciples whenever they were getting in the boat? Here's what Jesus didn't say. Jesus didn't say, hey guys, let's get in the boat and we'll see what happens. He didn't say that. He said, let's get in the boat and go to the other side. And so there on that boat, whenever they start going crazy and saying, Lord, we're going to die out here, Jesus says, you guys got no faith. What's wrong with you? And we kind of look at it and we're like, wow, that's kind of harsh. You know why Jesus said they had no faith? They didn't believe his word. He said, let's go to the other side. They thought, we're going to die. all through these stories, and really throughout all the Gospels, you see the power of the Word of God. Whenever I look in the mirror and I think, man, I'm just too much of a mess, I don't know how God could fix me. You know, the crazy thing is, we never listen to the Lord. We're willing to tell the Lord, we'll even pray to Him like, Lord, I'm so sorry, and like, I just am so messed up, and I've got all these problems, and I hope you can fix me and forgive me and all that. And God is sitting up there saying, what's wrong with you people? I've told you how to get this mess untangled. I've told you how to find solutions. Get in this book. My word is the thing that can unravel whatever mess. You'll discover that I am compassionate. You're questioning if I care about you? Read what I said, that I'll take your sins and I'll throw them as far as the east does from the west. How could you question my compassion? How could you wonder about my power? Haven't you ever read about the Exodus? Haven't you read about Hezekiah whenever his people were under siege and my angel went through and took care of it? Like, I've given you this word that if you would tap into it, it would enact my power in your life no matter how messy it may be. And you see that in this story. The simple power of the word of the Lord. If your life's a mess right now, here's what you need to do. Like today or tomorrow, whenever you want to start this, but sooner rather than later, you need to open up this book. You need to get into Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I don't care which one. Just open one of them. Start reading the story of Jesus. Learn about His compassion. Learn about His power. Learn about His dedication to every single person He ever met. And let that start saturating your heart and your soul and let it change you. Because the way the Lord solves a mess is through His Word. There's another interlude that I'll give to you as far as lessons we learn from this story. You notice something about all the requests that are made? This is a very prayerful story. People praying to Jesus, I mean. You got the demons. It says they begged Jesus. Same word for all these people I'm about to tell you, by the way. But there in verse 13, you'll help me out here. He says there in, verse 12, the demons begged Jesus, saying, let us go into the swine. Weird thing, but did you know that Jesus says yes to demons? He answered the demon's prayer. He said, okay. He let them do it. And then a little later on in verse 17 that we just noted, the people begged Jesus, please leave. And in verse 18, it says that Jesus got into the boat. So now you would think that's a wrong prayer too. You don't ask Jesus to leave, and certainly Jesus wouldn't say yes to a prayer like that. And yet He did. But I want you to notice somebody in this story who Jesus did not say yes to. In verse 18, it says, as he was getting in the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was begging Jesus that he might accompany him. But Jesus did not let him. By the way, this is actually the second time Jesus denied the request, the beg of this man. The original beg, you notice in this whole story, is back earlier in verse 7, at the end of verse 7. He says, I implore you by God, do not torment me. There the man is saying, please, taking these demons out is tormenting me. It's hurting me, what you're doing to me. Please don't do it. And Jesus said, nah, I'm going to do it. And then later, he says, let me follow you, which makes sense because everywhere Jesus went, that's what he would say. Everybody he would meet, fishermen, hey, follow me. Tax collector, follow me. Everybody, follow me, follow me, follow me. And here this guy is saying, I want to go with you. And Jesus says, nope. What's the lesson we learn from that in this story? You know, whenever our life is a mess, we have a lot of requests of the Lord. Hasn't that been true for you? Your heart's been broken, and you beg the Lord. You might be begging the Lord right now. Give me that girl, please. Like, please give me that girl. You wanted some job, and you've been begging the Lord, please, I need that job. I want it so bad. Please, give me that. Some difficult situation in your family, you beg the Lord to take it away. Some hardship in your community or whatever, you beg the Lord, you beg the Lord. And the Lord doesn't always say yes. Just like in this story. It's actually funny, the man who is with Jesus is the one who Jesus cares about the most, is the one that Jesus says no to. And maybe there's another principle that you probably already know, but we need to be reminded of it. That the Lord doesn't always give us what we want, but He gives us what we need. And that applies in a lot of reasons. It applies in prayer. Whenever we ask the Lord, He doesn't always give us what we ask for, but He gives us what we really need. But actually in our lives, you know, there's a lot of things. Whenever you start doing what I just suggest you, open this book, fair warning, once you start reading it, you're going to find a bunch of stuff that you don't want to do. You're going to have to love your enemies. You're going to have to be honest, like all the time. Like no free passes on honesty. You're going to have to be someone who's a servant, who's not always thinking about your own interests. You're going to have to resist the passions of your flesh and your sexual urges and control them and not let them control you. This is not stuff that you want, but it's the stuff that we need. And whenever we're a mess, we got all the ideas about here's how I'll get fixed. And have you ever been that way? I mean, it's like if you're going bankrupt and you show up to a financial advisor and you're like, all right, here's what I'm thinking. You tell me if that's a good plan or not, you know? Or if you're way out of shape and you show up to the gym and you're like, all right, here's the workout plan and the diet plan that I'm thinking. I'm thinking Krispy Kreme just twice a week though. And that's the plan that I'm going to roll with. Now we know that's ridiculous. That's dumb. You can't go to somebody who's an expert and tell them what you want. You go to the person and you listen to what you need to hear. And whenever we're a mess, we can't come to the Lord and say, Lord, this is what I think I want. This is how my life should go. I don't know how my life should go. I'm a mess, remember? I'm coming broken. And I need Him to mend me. I need Him to heal me. I need Him to forgive me and fix me up so that I won't be broken anymore. All right, last lesson I'll bring to you from this story. Jesus tells the man no for a reason. Look at what He goes on to say in verse 18. Jesus said to him, go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how He had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. Jesus tells this man, no, you can't go with me. And Jesus told him, I guess, the hardest thing that this man could have heard. Go back to the people that were scared of you. Go back to those people who chained you up. Go back to those people who you couldn't stand to be with so much, or they couldn't stand you. Either way, so much that you were living with their dead ancestors. And not only do you go back there and you just be a quiet neighbor living on the edge of town, you go back and you engage those people. And you tell them what great things God has done for you and how He's had mercy on you. Would you want to do that if you were the man? Let me just show you. This actually tacks on a couple of principles we laid out. One of those being that Jesus had compassion on this man. I think this is an act of compassion by Jesus. Because if this man had just left town and never turned back, how much guilt will he have for the rest of his life? For the damage that he did and never getting to do anything to make it right. You know? This also shows this is what this man needed, because this was a way to help this man to repair some of the damage in his heart and soul by going back and doing something healthy in his community. And so Jesus didn't give him what he wanted, but He gave him something that he actually needed. But the great thing to me about this story is that it says whenever Jesus went back there, everyone was amazed. Now the amazement could just be like, wow, that's interesting, go away. But I don't think that was it. Because if you go a little further in the story of the Gospel of Mark, at the end of chapter 7, Jesus actually came back to the region of the Decapolis, which was right next to this place. You notice that's where the man went, right? There in verse 20, it says he went into the Decapolis, which was this region, 10 cities that were in this area, and he preached this gospel. And then it says at the beginning of Mark 8, it says, in those days. So I take it to mean that in that region, while Jesus came back to the Decapolis, the place where people said, get out of here, we don't want you here. The beginning of Mark chapter 8 is a really famous story. When thousands of people came to hear Jesus' teaching. Now, how did that happen? How do you go from, get out of here, we don't want you here, to thousands of people coming to hear Jesus teach? What I'm going to suggest to you is from one man. One man who'd been radically changed. And he went about, and everybody he could meet, he told people about what great things the Lord had done for him and how He'd had mercy on him. Here's the principle I think we learned from this last section of the story. Jesus takes the biggest messes and turns them into His best messengers. Jesus takes the biggest messes and turns them into His best messengers. By the way, do you know this is the first apostle? Now, I know he's not one of the authoritative, official apostles, but the word apostle means someone who's sent out on behalf of someone else. And Jesus had not yet sent out any apostles yet. They were all still learning. Remember, they're still in the boat thinking they're going to die. But this was the first man in all the Gospels who Jesus sends out to preach the gospel. How much did he know? How much did he know? How much time? That's it, right there. He knew Jesus. That was it. He didn't know nothing. Like, Jesus hadn't gone through any Bible studies with him. There wasn't like, we're going to do a 2-week training course. You know, there was no like, all right, here's all the prophecies you need to make sure to tell people how I'm going to fulfill. There was none of that. His message was, hey, the Lord did some great things for me. And the Lord's been merciful to me. Let me tell you about the time Jesus introduced himself to me. And he asked me, when I was a naked, crazy, demon-possessed man, he asked me, what's your name? And I didn't want him to mess with me. I wanted him to leave me alone because I was okay. I mean, I was not okay, but I wanted to be okay in my mess. And yet he wouldn't let me. And he ripped those demons out of me, and it hurt me, man, because I didn't even know who I was. If I didn't have those demons, I didn't know who I was. But that didn't matter to him. He did a great thing. And he pulled me out. And man, it hurt me whenever he said I couldn't go with him. But that's why I'm standing before you today, is to tell you about what great things he's done for me and how he's had mercy on me. That's a sermon right there, man. And that'll change people. Because Jesus takes the biggest messes and turns them into his best messengers. You know, I want to tell you all a bunch of stories of people I love and people I know who this is true of. But I don't think I need to. I think you already know. Because I bet you a lot of you in this room were a humongous mess. But then the Lord did something to you. And those are the best people who teach the rest of us about how to share the gospel. And I'm going to suggest to you, if you want to be more evangelistic, the way to be evangelist is to realize that you're a mess and that the Lord's fixed you up. That's what motivates evangelism. That's what helps us to help other people, is when we realize how much the Lord has done for us and how he's been merciful to us. By the way, the big secret of this lesson is all about evangelism. And all these ways that Jesus treats us are things we're supposed to do for other people. You know, we can't run. No matter how big of a mess someone is, don't run away from them. Be there for them. Let your compassion be filled up by the Lord's love for you so that your compassion is greater than anybody's complications. Make sure that you invest your time, your energy, your money, your emotion, your ear, your words, whatever it is. You make whatever investment necessary for that one person. You pay whatever cost is necessary to help someone know the Lord if they'll let you. You make sure to use the Lord's word. Don't use your own. Your word can't stop waves and wind and all that stuff, but his can. And you know, you tell people the truth. People may not want to hear it, but you got to tell it. Because the Lord didn't give us what we wanted. He gives us what we need so that we can be his disciples. So that we all, no matter how messy we were, we could become his messengers in the world. That's the Lord's plan for us. And that's what Jesus does when Jesus meets a mess. It may be somebody this morning is here and you are a mess. And you may want to acknowledge that. You may not totally know what to do, and that's okay. None of us do until we come to the Lord. It may be that you're ready and you know that you need to confess Jesus as Lord. You need to repent of your sins and be baptized so that you'll be his disciple. It may be that you have a lot of questions about what all that is, even who Jesus is or what it means to follow him. It may be that you followed him in the past and you need to get things right. Whatever you need to do, don't leave this place in a mess. Come and let the Lord start fixing you up. If we can help you in any way, please come while we stand and sing.